Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. It's the podcast that takes a look at relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I've got a master's degree in marriage and family counseling and therapy, and I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA. I'm on a mission to help people more easily understand mental health and relationships and help break down the stigmas surrounding counseling and therapy. And that's why every week, a guest therapist and I talk about a movie and what relationship or mental health issue it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And while you're doing that, help other people find the show by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review of it in the podcast app. This month, we've got a goal of hitting 40 individual 5-star ratings. And right now, we're sitting pretty at 25. If you like what you hear each week on the show, click through to the show's page in the podcast app and give us a 5-star rating. We really do appreciate you helping us accomplish our mission of making mental health easier to understand and engage with. Today in the theater, my guest is Dr. Adrianne McKeon. Adrianne is a psychologist here in Nashville who, in addition to her typical work, is bilingual. She can treat patients using the English and Spanish languages. She brought with her 2004's I Heart Huckabees. IMDb says this about it. Determined to solve the coincidence of seeing the same conspicuous stranger 3 times in a day, Albert hires a pair of existentialist detectives who insist on spying on his everyday life while sharing their views on life and the nature of the universe. Make sure you stay tuned until the end of today's episode so you don't miss 2 important announcements that we've got on deck. All right, let's get to the main event. Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Adrianne.
Hello.
Welcome to the theater.
Thank you.
Thanks
for having me.
Glad to have you. So I like to start out every conversation with my guests with the question, why therapy? Why do you do what you do?
Well, I could say I decided to become a psychologist, but truly I feel like it's who I am. And I just finally have a label for it.
Nice. Well, let me ask you this. So you said psychologist. So are psychologists and not therapist?
Yes.
So, okay. So we have not had a psychologist on the show
the first
before.
one.
First one. So I would love if, and I don't want to interrupt the story you were going to tell, but maybe if you could even just talk about the difference between a psychologist and a therapist.
Well, from what I understand, a therapist tends to have a master's in the mental health arts, and a psychologist has a doctorate in psychology.
Okay.
So after we get our master's, we go on to another 4 or 5 years of doctoral studies. Usually the purpose of the degrees are a little different. So most people that get their master's, they exclusively want to do therapy. They want to interact with clients. Most of the time when you're getting your doctorate is because you're interested in research and you're interested in teaching as well as interacting with clients and therapy.
Cool. Is there any advantage, like I'm just thinking practically, is there any advantage for a client to seek out a psychologist instead of a therapist? Of course, more training, but, practically speaking.
I think practically speaking, there's therapists and psychologists of quality everywhere. And I think it depends on, honestly, best fit. As a client, my recommendation is always find the best fit. Find the person who feels best for you, whether that's a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or a therapist. Psychologists do tend to look at the research a lot. We've been trained to read and create research. So it's been kind of really instilled in us the importance of research and evidence-based practice.
And I would
lots of
imagine
times,
like you had to do your own research
Yes.
as a part of the degree. So potentially if your research fell in line with your specialty, which how could it not, then you would be getting somebody who knows and is trained significantly more in a particular, and if that matches your need as a client, that's a great fit.
Yes, I would say so. And we tend to like to teach as well. And lots of times when you teach, it gives you a much deeper understanding, comprehensive understanding of topics and mental health.
Oh yeah, you've got a, who was it? Somebody said the true mark of a genius is being able to explain something complex in a simple way for people to understand. So I would imagine that that's a giant part of teaching. It's just figuring out, how do I communicate this complex idea in a way that, you know, if you're thinking classroom, potentially 10 or more people who all learn in different ways can get hit with. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So a therapist tends to function more out of a practitioner model, and most psychologists tend to work out of a scientist practitioner model.
Okay. Nice. You know, you mentioned finding a good fit for a client, and I'm always a proponent of just echoing this. Sometimes that's something you can tell while you're shopping for a therapist. Sometimes you pick one, you get into the room, and I'm always a proponent of telling people who sit on the client's couch, trust your gut. Like if you feel like you're not connecting, then it's okay to say that in the room. It's okay to say to the therapist who does not have authority over you. They're not somebody that you like have to feel intimidated and listen to everything they say and go with. It's okay to say, I don't feel like we're connecting. And also it's okay to say, this isn't working out. I need to find somebody different. Like, and I am a therapist who is saying that. Like, it's okay for you as a client to find a great connection and trust yourself. So if your gut is saying, I don't feel like this is working out, there's a reason for that.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Usually what I tell my clients is that it usually takes 2 to 3 sessions to really know if we're a good fit. And sometimes I have to refer out because I'm not the best therapist for them.
Yeah.
I can tell maybe they need something more or something different. But absolutely, I agree with you. Especially, I work with a lot of Hispanic clients, and sometimes there's more of a hierarchy culturally. And so they'll call me doctora, you know, so there's that authority.
Yeah.
There's that sense of authority. And so I really try, like you say, to bring that equality that, you know,
Yeah.
we're the same. I'm here for you. I'm serving you. And I want you to trust yourself.
Yeah.
You can challenge me. You can tell me if something's not working.
Working with a lot of, and I feel terrible because I interrupted your why therapy, but now I'm thinking of questions. So like working with, you said a lot of Hispanic clients. Yes. So in my undergrad, I went to Columbia International University in South Carolina, and there was a big international student population that came in. And one thing, I had a friend who was from Ecuador who actually lives in Nashville now, strangely enough. One thing he explained to me, at least in his experience, was there was a little bit of, and I don't have a better word for it, caste system in the, I don't know, is Latin American community the best word for that? Like including Central America and South America?
Yeah, hierarchy is probably not as much as, I mean, this is from my research. I have a master's in cross-cultural psychology. So in a lot of the research, it shows that Asian societies tend to have more rigid hierarchical values. But yes, Latin American countries do tend to hold very tightly to hierarchies.
Have you
authority.
Encountered any of that in your work? Like maybe a client who would consider themselves in a higher hierarchical role or in a lower one? And has that been made overt and you've had to kind of join in a different way?
I can't say that I've had a client who felt like they knew more than me or that they were somehow better than me. I've had a lot of clients who, yes, who didn't feel like they could challenge me. And that's also, speaking culturally, as Hispanics, we like to be agreeable. We don't like to rock the boat.
Is there a saving face kind of thing too? Like they would offer you respect and they would not want to cause you to lose face?
I don't, that's possible, but I mean, I think lots of times the motivation is just like you want to be agreeable.
Okay.
You don't want to offend anybody. You don't want to hurt anybody. It's important to have peace collectively, and so it takes a while. It takes a while for them to practice that so that they can challenge me and say, no, that's not it. And so I really have to encourage that at the beginning.
Yeah, I've had a few, like a handful of clients that aren't like traditional American, Western, Southern, where their parents immigrated. And so for me, it's always just a matter of employing curiosity and maybe even just kind of saying and trying to make it overt. Hey, like if I'm thinking about how this issue might be addressed in a American way, it may look like this, but I want to also recognize that maybe you've got a different set of family rules and values. So if we're thinking of this as a principle, how might this still be employed, but in a way that fits in with kind of how your family works? And that's always just been something that I've found really interesting. And there's even been times where it doesn't work as a principle, that you've got to look at it a different way. Is that something that with your clients that you kind of are recognizing, or, do you have a background and a history enough to where you just kind of intuitively get it and you speak the same, I guess literally and metaphorically speak the same language?
I think that that's a real gift that you're giving your clients to, I always say, always ask, never assume. Those are my two tenets in therapy. And I think that that's such a gift that instead of making assumptions, you're opening that space up and asking them how it's done for them and their family, and just giving them that comfort to be able to just come out and explain to you, really just educate you on how their family works. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, for the most part, not always, every family is different. And just because you belong to the same larger culture or system, it doesn't mean that all families function the same way. But yeah, many times it's not as big of a stretch for me to understand how that family might be functioning or how they might perceive a topic or an issue or why they're behaving in a certain way. It's maybe a little easier for me to understand it.
Nice. That's another good example of finding a good fit. I've had guests on before that talked about when they were searching for a therapist as a client, because of the particular set of issues that they were struggling with, they were really looking for a therapist who had experience and specialty in that, because they had therapists who didn't. And they said they felt like they had to spend time educating the therapist, and they didn't want to do that again. They wanted to just go in and be able to, I don't want to say assume, but just have a common language, maybe,
Yeah, I agree. I had a client who was a Hispanic young woman, and she had been to another female therapist, and the female therapist, she felt, did not understand what her family dynamic was, and her other therapist was telling her, well, just tell your parents and just kind of be this empowered woman. And she was really put off by that.
Challenge your parental authority.
Right.
That doesn't seem like something that would fit into...
And there are ways to challenge, but it has to be done carefully, and it has to be within the framework of respeto. is what you would call it in Spanish. The respeto is something that is really highly valued. Is
Is
really
there a
important.
translation for that?
I mean, respect.
Yeah.
But I mean, to us, like the word respect is a little different because respeto in Spanish is it's a whole way of being within the family.
Does it feel like, I mean, as a bilingual person, does it feel like respect? I'm not even going to try to pronounce it the way. Does it feel like that's a little bit of a heavier word? Like it carries
Yes.
more with it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So maybe like respect would be something that you would offer a teacher because they're in a position of authority, whereas the other, it might be a loved one or something where there's, I don't know if authority is even the right word. I don't know. Love and authority and influence, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it would be kind of disrupting the whole way that your family functions and the way they love each other.
It's a
and-
systemic thing.
Yes, correct.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I could see how if somebody was telling that client, yeah, just challenge that, they'd be
Yes.
like, that's making the sky not blue. That's making water not wet. It's not going to work. I can't do that.
And I think it can be done, but it's a delicate process and it takes time. Somebody can't come in your office and you go, well, tell your parents, just tell them, it's like, what?
It's
No.
not one confrontation.
Yeah.
It's maybe recognizing.
They need to be eased into it, and so does the family. So I think that for me in therapy, I think a lot of therapists are like this, but I tell people, bring whoever in that you feel will be helpful. Bring your wife in, bring your mom in, bring your adult son in, bring your cousin in, bring your neighbor in.
Do you do a lot of
Whoever.
family therapy?
I don't do a lot of family therapy, but I feel like sometimes through the individual, I am doing family therapy. So this thing of like, well, no, we're doing individual therapy. We're only working with the individual. No, I mean, they're functioning within the family. And I think that for some cultures, especially, it's like you are the family. You can't, you don't exist without your family.
can't separate
in some
it
ways.
out.
Yes, you can't separate it out. So I say, bring your mom in. Let's talk to your mom. Let's bring your dad. Let's bring your brother in.
Wow.
Let's talk to them and see
Yeah.
what's going on.
Wow. Well, let's get back to your why therapy. So, I mean, I don't know. Start from the beginning. Let's go back to that.
Well, when I went to college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And when I went to college and I took my first psychology class, I said, oh my gosh, there's people do this? Like, this could be a job. This could be my career. And I said, I am this. There is a name for what I am. Now I just need to get the degree so that the rest of society recognizes what it is that I am. So when I talk about being a psychologist, it's not just a job or a career or something that I do. It's something that I am. It's a very big part of my identity. And I feel like it's a calling, honestly. It's a calling. It's not something that I could turn away from in my life.
Before taking that class in psychology, had you had any experience as a client in therapy? Because I know, like, for me, before I did, my only ideas of it were what I saw in movies and TV.
Yeah, no, I hadn't been to therapy. I wasn't really sure what therapy was like or what it would look like. And honestly, I didn't even know what it would be like until I went to graduate school. But I did know that people tended to come to me and talk to me because I was a good listener. I felt like I made people comfortable. People trusted me. I could be discreet. And I really liked kind of studying people. I grew up in Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico is a very like context specific place. So like in the US, communicating with people is much easier because if you can understand the content, you can understand what the person is saying for the most part. But in Puerto Rico, there's all of these very tiny, complex facial expressions and body language that you have to keep track of while you're talking to somebody. And I wasn't very good at that. So I really had to make a big effort to study people and understand what message they were conveying when they were speaking.
Yeah.
So that kind of led me to understand people, and I was interested in it. And also, so my mom's Brazilian, my dad's from Louisiana, and I was born and raised as a Puerto Rican. So, yes.
That math doesn't add up. How does that?
Well, because I was born and raised, my parents moved to Puerto Rico after they
Okay.
got married. So I identify as Puerto Rican.
Okay.
But a lot of Puerto Ricans would call me La Gringa, because my dad is
Yeah.
American. So at a very early age, I learned the importance of culture and how culture can really shape who you are, how you're perceived. And that just really interested me. So I've always had a passion for understanding culture and our cultural identity.
Yeah. So dad was Louisiana. Mom was Brazil.
Yeah, he went to the Peace Corps.
Okay.
He worked in the Peace Corps for 2 years, as a volunteer in northern Brazil. And that's where he met my mom. So when she moved to Puerto Rico, she only spoke Portuguese.
Well, I was going to say,
Yeah.
so growing up in a household that's already bilingual in a country that is a different language than that.
Right, yeah.
Did you learn Portuguese growing up as well?
I learned some, but mostly Spanish and English.
Okay. In your family growing up, did you guys incorporate American and Brazilian kind of tradition and culture within your household, as well as what was coming in the door from Puerto Rico?
I wasn't aware of it at the time. I just thought we were a regular Puerto Rican household, except that my mom couldn't really make the same rice and beans as the other moms. I didn't realize it at the time because as a kid, you just think your family's your family. Isn't everybody's
Nothing's
family the
weird.
same?
It's in our house, so this is the real world, and
Right.
other things are
Right.
weird.
It's only as you get older and you start really looking, examining other families, and experiencing how other people live, that your wheels really start turning and you realize that things are different. And so, yeah, my parents really worked at combining these different cultures.
Wow. And that just sounds like it is meshed beautifully with your work.
I think so. I think it's been really helpful.
Like to be a person who is the product of cultures mixing and mingling, to be able to work with people who, whether or not they're trying to, this is another, okay, so we were talking earlier about my wife being a social worker. This is something that she highlighted a couple of episodes ago at the end, the difference between integration and assimilation. And so whether or not your clients are trying to integrate or assimilate, to be able to speak from a place of I guess, cross-culturalness, just sounds like such a great, almost preordained kind of thing.
I've always been a little bit on the outside culturally, but I think it's been such a benefit. I think it's been such an advantage to not be completely immersed in your culture, because in Puerto Rico, I was la gringa, and then in the U.S., I didn't grow up here. So sometimes my husband will say, oh, this song, this country song. I'm like, we didn't listen to country music. So, the song that was the top hit, in the 90s when we were kids, I'd never heard it before. And he's how could you never hear that song? I'm like, I don't know. We didn't listen to that. So I love that I'm just a little bit outside of the culture, just enough to kind of be on the outside looking in.
Does
and
that help spark your
examining it.
curiosity?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I had a friend, when I lived in Southern California, I had a friend from Colombia. And there was one day we were riding, it was it was on July 11th, and the only reason I know that is because the only reason we were driving is going from one 7-Eleven to the other to get free Slurpees. But I had the Beatles on in the car, and he goes, hey, who is this? And I went, what? It's the Beatles. And he's like, yeah. I was like, the Beatles? Like the founders of pop music? He's like, dude, I grew up in Bogota. I don't know what.
Yeah. I tell my husband that all the time.
Which I thought was really funny. So you found something deep inside of you that you feel like was already a part of you connected with.
Yes.
and then leaned into that.
Yep.
That feels like something so unusual, like such a gift. Because I just know that, so many of my clients, so many of my friends, even me at one point, you feel like you're looking for something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking for almost like you would express it like you're looking for a piece of you that you can't find, and you were able to find that. What has that done for you to find something like that?
That's kind of a big question.
It is.
I don't know. It's hard because I've been with it for so long. I mean, I think that a lot of it has to do with just being lucky enough that I live in a society that recognizes and has a place for somebody like me. Because there wasn't always this job of a therapist or a psychologist. But in the society, there happens to be that job, that role, that place for me. And so as long as you know yourself well enough and you're self-aware, I was able to find that.
Yeah.
But I think that for some other people, they have to create it because it's not already available in society. It hasn't been created for them, so they have to make it themselves.
Yeah. And I think, that, you mentioning as long as you know yourself well enough, we've talked about that a little bit on the show in bits and pieces, but this is just a job that if you're not in touch with yourself,
Oh my gosh,
this is not going to work.
Yes.
I
You are
mean,
your tool.
You are
your tool.
The therapeutic relationship is the biggest tool of the therapist, but that's a two-way thing. And if you're not in touch with yourself, that doesn't work. You're
Correct.
automatically down 50%.
That's right. Yeah.
And it seems like from what, gosh, that you were just building your therapist this whole time. Like you mentioned that, learning how to pick up on all the nonverbals.
Yeah.
I mean, wow. That was just being constructed this whole time. That's so cool. I came to it later. Like I had a whole career before it, and they were.
But you needed that career.
And
you
that's
needed
that's
that
100% true.
career.
And I've said that, to others. There was even, one night that Leigh-Ann and I were walking our dog, and I don't know why or how it hit me, but I just recognized, the 10 years before this, wherein some of those times were really tough and really difficult. Like the church that I was at in San Diego that I was fired from. If I hadn't been fired from that church, I would have never gone back to South Carolina. I would have never gone to work at my home church. I was laid off from that church because they couldn't continue paying me. I'd have never, which at the same time they laid me off, I had started therapy as a client. Because I wanted to continue therapy as a client, I knew I need to find a job that has insurance. So I went to work at Starbucks. At Starbucks, I met Leigh-Ann. If I'd have never gone through the tough stuff in San Diego getting fired, I'd have never met Leigh-Ann. I'd have never started the therapy that I was starting in my hometown, which led me to get more in touch with myself, which led me to recognize something inside of me that connected with it, that developed a passion for it, that wanted to get educated in it. And so I would have never come to grad school in Nashville, and I wouldn't be sitting in the chair that I'm sitting in right now. And those things that I was able to, and it was through therapy. Like therapy helped so much with learning how to integrate those parts of my story and really engage with them enough to where I could understand them and be changed by them and own them. I wouldn't have the self that I have, and I wouldn't be able to do this. And it's weird to be able to look back at those times that when I was in them, I was cursing them, to be able to look back from this chair and be thankful for them. That's a really strange and cool thing.
Come a long way.
Yeah.
Those dots connected.
Oh, yeah.
And you can finally see that constellation of the connected dots.
Yeah, but when you're in it.
Oh, yeah.
Like I heard a podcast the other day where somebody was talking about, needing people, other people to speak into your life. And the way that they kind of phrased it was, you can't read the bottle from it. You can't read the label from inside the bottle.
Right.
And I thought, oh yeah, that's good. I like that. That's why you need those outside influences and even to recognize that we tend as a species to be a little short-sighted. And so, to be able to be patient and vulnerable and continue to walk, even though you don't really know what's next.
Yeah, and who knows? How exciting. Who knows what's waiting for you in the future?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's another weird thing is I think in the past, to look to the future and imagine your happiness would be there, to experience that, and then currently to be in the present and be so happy, which happiness is circumstantial. I recognize that. Like, there's still tough times, but all in all, to be content and happy, and then to just go, man, anything on top of this, that's just a bonus. So let's talk movies.
Okay.
So what movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
I Heart Huckabees.
I Heart
Yes.
Huckabees. 2004. Did not remember it being that old. Like, I remember seeing the trailers for it come out when it did, but couldn't have, for 15 years to have passed. I still have trouble with that kind of stuff. Like, when you think about a decade ago,
Yeah.
I still think that was the 90s.
I know.
And that is
That's
not.
what happens when you get older.
Ooh, yeah. I just had my 39th, so that's...
Oh, me too. In September. Yeah.
Oh,
Preparing
October.
for the 40th. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I'm going to have the 40th. I think maybe I'll just let
skip
somebody
that
else
one.
have it and just celebrate the anniversary of the 39th, maybe. I was telling my wife that when the 30th one hit, I just wanted to stay in the fetal position in bed all day. And then somebody said, "You want to go to Cracker Barrel?" And I was like, "Okay." And then I was
You can
going,
always go to Cracker Barrel.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good way to get me out of bed anytime. So what was it about I Heart Huckabees that attracted you to it and made you want to talk about that?
Well, I mean, very rarely in a movie do I see kind of what my thought process is. These are things that I'm thinking about all the time, and there are very few people that speak to it.
Yeah.
So when I was watching it, and many years after that, I thought, yes, exactly, yes. And so I just thought I'd bring it in and talk about it.
Wow. That is interesting. So have you watched it more than once?
Well, yes, I've watched it for today.
Okay. Oh, but I meant like since the first time.
No,
that you...
I'm not big into rewatching movies.
Okay.
Yeah, but it has been one of my favorite movies.
Because I found it a little bit difficult to connect with while I was watching it. So, if you had to say what it was about, what would you say it's about?
I think it's just trying to portray like human conflict, human suffering, how we try to resolve them, how we try to conceptualize them and lived through those. We try to live those concepts. We try to live those ideas about what we think is human suffering, meaning about that, about our lives.
Yeah. Okay. It is definitely a very philosophical movie.
And I don't read a lot of philosophers or anything like that. So I couldn't really like name off like Kant or whatever.
Yeah.
So
I think no, that wouldn't even work. I was gonna say the farthest I could would be Jung, but Jung wasn't a philosopher.
I'm total Jungian.
Yeah.
I love Jung.
I think so. I mentioned that there was a part like 30 or so minutes in where Leigh-Ann was like, "Pause it. What's this about?" And I think the way that I phrased it then was, it seems like it's about what if big philosophical questions about the way the world worked were personified.
Right.
And then they started interacting with each other.
Yeah.
That was the best I could get 30 minutes in.
I think you're describing it much better than I did.
And really like 30 minutes in, and I just pulled up IMDb on the phone because for somebody that loves movies so much, I'm terrible at character names. So like Albert, I guess would be the main character.
Yeah, he's the protagonist, I would say.
So like 30 minutes in, it was really like he had just met the two existential detectives, Vivian and Bernard.
Yes.
And had hired them to, I don't know if I would say solve. I think maybe he said solve, but I guess I would say find the meaning in a coincidence that he was experiencing.
Yes.
This is like trying to explain Waiting for Godot or something. Like, this is so like, you have to read something in English class and then the teacher is like telling you all the meaning behind it almost. But that's like, I think that's where it was in the story when we kind of paused, because he had like encountered, or I guess it started with him just showing up talking to Vivian, and then you kind of get backstory of how he got there from the dinner and the jacket and the card and the African doorman that he met out. That's the coincidence, is him encountering this same person 3 times.
Right,
So he was just trying to figure out, what does this mean that I encounter a person 3 times?
And isn't that what we all do in our lives?
Yes.
We have an experience that we feel it just kind of hits us. It resonates for us for some reason. And we want to know if there's meaning in it or if it's just a coincidence.
So that happens, and I that's how I articulated it to Leigh-Ann, is the best I could at that time. 30 minutes in, it was just like, all right, what if questions had bodies and now they're interacting with each other? Story wise, then you start adding in and weaving in all of these other characters, and I don't even know where to really take it from there. Like,
Well, so Albert is a very idealistic young man, and he has this charter to save green spaces.
would you say he's an activist?
I suppose you could call him,
Because I
an
couldn't tell if that was
activist,
his
yeah.
job or if that was his.
I think it's his
hobby.
job. I think he gets paid to run the charter. I don't know how much, but he has an apartment, and that's all he does. And it's a very thankless job. He's always fighting against these big forces, and it almost seems impossible. He's always doubting himself in his mind. A lot of negative self-talk is what therapists would call it, which is when you're saying very negative things about yourself and kind of putting yourself down, right? And so he meets this man called Brad, who is some corporate executive.
Which is Jude Law?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's a corporate executive, and he promises for Huckabees, which is this big company. I imagine it's, like a Walmart or something like that.
It's some kind
I
of
don't know.
They call themselves the everything store or something like
Yeah.
that. So it's
It's like a Target or a Walmart or
yeah.
something like that, is my guess. And he promises him that he can help save this meadow, this big open space, through corporate support, and that they'll get good PR. But it turns out that Brad is kind of a shell of a person, and all he wants is to charm people and be viewed as this great, wonderful person by his company.
he was using Albert.
Yeah, he was using Albert, and really corporate was just going to use most of that space and just save a small space. So he was just kind of manipulating everyone. But for some reason, he seems to try to take everything from Albert that Albert cares about. So he finds a way to take the charter away from him, the organization that he founds from him. He takes all his supporters away from him. And so I guess Albert learns a lot about himself through that.
Yeah. I found that it was, in addition to, having characters that were kind of questions walking around, there was a very visual component to the personal work that Albert was doing in the movie. Like, once he meets Vivian and Bernard, it starts with him just being in an office with Vivian and him kind of explaining to her, here's why I'm here, here's what I want, and then her saying what she's going to do. I'm going to follow you around everywhere. I'm going to listen to everything. I'm going to see everything in an effort
No details too small.
Right. In an effort. And she puts bugs, listening devices in, like, everywhere, in his office, in his home, in his, I guess, in the Huckabees office where he's going to have meetings. And she, you see her with like a handset to an older telephone, I guess, listening in on those things and taking notes and appearing outside of his apartment window and watching him brush his teeth. And she also explains, I've got a partner who's going to be coming at the work from a different angle. And that's Dustin Hoffman, Bernard. And he seems to be the more interested in the introspective work. Maybe
Right.
she is the observing the outward and he is observing the inward. INWARD. I don't want to make sure that my accent doesn't like spin that pronunciation into something different. And one of the things that he does is he has Albert get inside of, I don't know, a body bag. Like, I don't
Does
know
look
how
like a
else
body
to
bag, yes.
describe that, which I'm claustrophobic. And even just watching that, I was like, nope, I would not do. But I'm trying to remember the directive that he gave him before
He asked
got in
him
there.
to have everything fall away, anything that defines him, anything that could identify him in any way.
Oh,
So,
and he explained the blanket before that.
oh, that's right.
So he was,
Yeah.
I guess, explaining and expressing his worldview, I suppose. And he held up a blanket and he was basically saying, like, we are all a part of the same thing.
We're all connected.
Yeah,
There's
we're
no
all
otherness. Yeah.
And he would say stuff like, this part of the blanket is the universe, and this part is Tuesday, and this part is you, and this part is something else, and it's all made of the same. And it really was. That's what he was saying, is we're all connected.
Yeah.
And then he had him get into the body bag and he zipped it up. And that's where this kind of visual component that I guess the movie revisits several times kind of comes in, where you almost see, which this kind of thing in movies is always interesting to me, when they try to demonstrate what it's like having thoughts and memories, because I think that it is pretty sporadic. Like, it's not like a linear kind of thing. Like, I think of the movie Forgetting Sarah Marshall, where he's going through a breakup and he'll just be in his life, and all of a sudden the scene flashes to something that he went through with her, and then he's back in the present. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty accurate when you're
Yeah.
grieving. And and I feel like with this, him, I guess, doing identity work, that was pretty, it was a good demonstration of that. It was just him really creating symbols for different parts of himself and then having interactions with those inside of a bag.
Well, I mean, if you're an existential detective, I mean, the perfect place to do the exercises in a body bag, right? Because it heightens your awareness of your mortality.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the way I saw it is that practice is basically any practice that somebody would choose to help kind of dissolve all this conflict and drama and just all this stuff that clutters us, but it's really not us, and it's really not helpful in our lives. So at least for me, that would be meditation. When he talks about just letting everything fall away and just kind of trying to be in the moment and seeing what you're feeling, and being open to the connection between you and others. The idea that you as an individual is a separate entity, that's an illusion. That's something that you can really get at when you're meditating. But I'm sure that for some other people, it could be prayer or another practice.
Which, I mean, mindfulness isn't necessarily always sitting cross-legged on the floor and meditating and contemplating. It has many different practices to it. So however a person can connect with themselves better.
Right. Yeah.
I think I wonder, and it seemed like Albert was wondering this too, how he got from, I have this thing that feels significant, meeting this person more than once. Can you help me find the significance, into a body bag? Like, it seemed like Vivian was gonna be the person who, like, okay, cool, I'm gonna study everything and figure out, then he gets handed over to Bernard, and Bernard's like, all right, we're gonna explore the inside.
Yeah.
So it seemed like that, at least to Albert, that was a disconnect. Like, I'm not trying to find
Right.
something
You
on the
tell
inside.
me.
Yeah.
You look at the outside and tell me what's going on.
Which
Yeah.
that rings true to me for, like, the therapy world, because I remember when I was going to see my therapist at the beginning, a friend told me, if he only tries to address the issue you're going in for, he's a bad therapist. You shouldn't see him.
Right. Yeah.
Like
It's all connected.
That's a
right?
symptom. He needs to address a disease, so to speak. And that feels like that was what was kind of going on, in that part. Like Bernard was recognizing, okay, you are trying to find the meaning of that, but there's also a deeper thing that can be addressed, that maybe the pursuit of the meaning of the coincidence is a symptom of.
Correct. Yeah, I would say so. Mm-hmm.
So he encounters Brad. I don't even know how to unpack all this. Brad's got a girlfriend that I don't know if you knew that she was his girlfriend, Dawn, who is the spokesperson for
Huckabees. Yes.
So you kind of see at the beginning these intercuts of commercials that she's filming, as well as even the first time in the bag. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if Albert had met Dawn at this point. But like the first time in the bag, he there's a picture of her in his mind of her saying, "Don't look at me."
Right.
And that comes into play later. But then we get introduced to Mark Wahlberg's character, Tommy.
Yeah, Tommy Corn.
Tommy. I just saw that last name. I was like,
Tommy
that's a
Corn,
real last
I love
name.
It.
Sheesh.
It's like just feeding into the absurd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Tommy is on the lawn.
He's a firefighter, and he's kind of going through a crisis.
Was that?
Yeah.
That was his girlfriend.
And his daughter.
And his, okay.
Yeah.
Was
or
that,
his wife. Yeah,
whose stuff was all of that on the lawn?
I think it was their stuff because she was moving out.
Okay.
She's couldn't handle his crisis anymore. He was having this existential or mental health crisis.
Yeah.
And he's a firefighter, so that does make sense because you do encounter a lot of things in your work that make you question, what's the point of all of this? Why is there so much suffering? When's it going to end? And so he's having kind of a breakdown.
Yeah. Which I would imagine somebody that deals with life or death situations on a daily basis, existential crises would probably come.
Yeah, they're fair questions.
Quite often.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but he talks about a book that he's reading that has led him to. Now, you said about Albert that he was an optimistic person. Tommy, when we meet him, seems to be the opposite of that.
Yeah, so he's reading a book by a nihilist, Aunt Katerine, and basically it's the opposite of the connectivity. So,
and if we had to identify what nihilism was, it means everything's meaningless.
Life, we're just pieces of meat waiting to die.
Yeah,
there's no meaning. Everything's a coincidence. There's no connection between us. To each his own.
Yeah, kind of a do whatever you want because nothing matters.
Yes.
Which is, I think, just observing what I've observed in my 39 years seems to be a philosophy that goes against human nature. At least for me, because I feel like humans are the only species on Earth that makes meaning out of things. And we constantly look for that. It's like we're constantly just looking for connections.
We're hardwired for it. Yeah.
And so to live as a nihilist would seem to go against that. But Tommy's doing it. He's trying it.
Well, and it would be a relief in some ways because if there's no meaning to anything, if everything's just a coincidence, you don't have to try anymore.
Yeah. And if connections have caused you hurt.
Right.
And if trying to lean into the meaning has just been too tough, it would seem like it would be an unshackling experience.
Yeah.
But it's certainly causing the end of his relationship because his girlfriend's leaving him.
Yeah.
And taking all the stuff. And I think at one point he brings up the book or something and she says something like, I don't want to talk about your dumb book.
Right.
Like, I'm tired of hearing about.
And that's most of us. Like, most of us just want to live our life.
Yeah.
We don't want to think about all of this, all these hard questions because they seem impossible to answer. And so we just kind of want to live our lives and not think about it.
And I think a lot of times, no, I can't say for everybody, maybe just for me. I thought going into therapy, I was going to get an answer. I was going to, and I thought I was going to graduate as well. So like I thought, okay, I'll start therapy. I'll be in it for a fixed amount of time,
Yeah.
whatever that time is. I don't think I had a period of time in mind, but I just thought, it'll be like high school or middle school or college. Like how long you're going to be in it. And I'm going to get some piece of something along the way, a 3-part system or an answer to one question that's going to just cause this enlightenment. And, and then when I get on the other side, which I know I've said this before, I won't be as affected by things. Like I thought I would feel less, or that things would cause me to have feelings less because I would just intuitively, I don't know, have it more together or something.
Yeah.
And that's not, none of that stuff is what I found. None of it's true. Like I almost, I ended up having more feelings, but knowing what to do with them.
More questions.
Yet more questions, and living. I said this to a client one time, like we're in my office. I have a lot of gray in my office. And I even said to them like, oh yeah, that's symbolic because we have to live in the gray more. And I was like, I'm just kidding. I didn't think that much about, I just like gray. Like I did not plan that to wear, but I mean, but living more in the gray, being able to say, I don't know, and being okay leaving it at that.
Yeah. A lot of therapy is just being able to tolerate ambiguity.
Yeah.
Because that's life.
Yes.
Like I'm thinking about like meditation or prayer, or, any practice that you use to help manage those emotions and help kind of calm your nervous system, and just having that practice. And, anybody who does those things thinking that they're going to reach some pinnacle, or there's going to be some kind of transformation where they're not going to have to deal with, the stuff of life, then they're going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
Like I was thinking about like, there's this like Buddhist refrain that says, before enlightenment, chop wood, fetch water. After enlightenment, chop wood, fetch water. So it doesn't matter where you're at, you're still going to have to be in the stuff of life. You're still going to be in conflict. You're still going to feel negative emotions. There's no escape from it.
And I think the thing in me that I hadn't understood yet was to be unaffected would be to not be engaging life. So there was this process in the and I don't know if I even knew that it was happening, but there was this process of getting in touch with my own heart and getting reconnected with myself, which is a lot of my therapy. It was getting reconnected with life, life on life's terms. And, you inevitably are going to be introduced to the ambiguity, to the gray, to
constantly
the feelings, to the connections. And without any of that stuff, you could be unaffected, but it would mean withdrawing. Like the only way to be unaffected is to withdraw.
Just disconnect from life.
Yeah. Which is what I had been doing. So I thought that the end result would be the past versus the end result being something different.
Yeah. And that is kind of tough. We have to sell that to our clients.
Yeah.
Because lots of times when they come in, they say, I just want to be the same person as before. And you and I both know that that's not going to happen. The only way to move forward is to become somebody new. Right. And so that's something that, at least for me, I have to really work on with clients, especially when they've gone through trauma. When you burn your hand, you don't expect your hand to go back to looking the same way. You're going to have scars, and it's going to be kind of a new hand in some ways. And so them accepting that they're going to be a new person out of this experience, and that they're going to end up appreciating that new person and being grateful for being that new person.
Well, I have there's a question that I ask almost every client when they are talking about what it is that's bringing them into therapy, the world that they're living in, or the life that they're living. And I'm aware of how kind of like snarky the question can be. I don't have a better way to phrase it, and I kind of like it being a little snarky, but just asking, how's that working for you?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, getting down onto a practical level, like you're
Yeah.
in my office, you know, you're coming to see me.
Yeah.
So to say, I want things to go back to the way they were, how did you get here then?
Right.
Because if the way that they were was working so well, you know, you're sitting in front of me. So what is it that you need? What is it that you want?
And sometimes it's so hard. Like we end up like thinking in such rigid ways that we don't even see that there are other options.
Right.
There are other ways of seeing things and other ways of being. We don't even know that those options are available to us.
Well, and I had a client yesterday who is fighting depression. And I mean, like major depressive disorder, like a diagnosed, you know, not just a circumstantial
Clinical
kind of,
level.
And as we were talking about it yesterday, he said, you know, this past week's been tough. I was at like a 7, an 8, or a 9 out of 10. And we've kind of defined his 10 as having suicidal ideations. And at one point he asked me, you know, have you ever had somebody who would choose the depression
Over
over something
no
different?
depression? Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so I said, at that point, I wanted to be sensitive to answering his question, so I kind of made it overt and just said, I hear your question. I'd like to answer it with a story, just because I've had some people that I have felt like ignored my question, so I want to like recognize and value. That's a great question. Let me tell a story to answer it. So I just kind of, this particular client comes from a Christian faith. And so I said, you know, in Exodus, as the Israelites leave Egypt, even though they came out of slavery, they came out of not being able to have agency over their future. When they get into the desert, which for them is a metaphorical and a literal journey and trial towards something better, they begin to complain that they're hungry, and then they begin to say, hey, we might have had it bad back there, but at least we knew we had food, and at least we were familiar with what our day was going to be, you know. And so I related to him in the sense of, you know, sometimes it's attractive for us to turn back and want to go back towards something that may have been hurtful or harmful, but that we knew, rather than journey towards something that might be better, but that we don't know anything about. Yeah. I said, so for you to say, is it possible that somebody would choose depression? Absolutely, because you know that life.
It's like, comfortable. It's familiar.
Yeah. So you know, when I feel this way, it's going to look like this, versus trying something new that seems risky and that you don't know and that may cause some growing pains and that kind of thing.
And who am I without my depression, right?
Yeah.
And how does my family know me without my depression? Will there be some resistance if I start taking some agency?
Yeah.
You know, when they're used to taking care of me or something like that.
Yeah. And it seems like both Tommy and Albert are in a similar place where their life has worked one way, and now they're trying, or they're at least having the opportunity to try something different.
Yeah, correct.
I think Tommy is a little more bought in to the different than Albert is, or at least maybe more aware of it, aware of buying in. So after we meet Tommy, I don't remember how she showed up, but somehow the author of the book,
Katerine just shows up,
is now there. Yeah. And you see this one instance where Albert is walking, and I've already forgot Lily Tomlin's name, Vivian, and Vivian is following Albert, and then Katerine is following Vivian. And it just, it just stacks on top of one another. But then characters kind of start to crisscross. Yeah. And Dawn has an existential crisis.
Right.
Who is Jude Law? Bob? What was his name?
Brad. Yeah.
Brad meets Albert for lunch or something. Albert tells him about Vivian and Bernard, so he hires them.
It's just one more conquest. He
Yeah.
wants to take whatever belongs to Albert. He wants to take it for himself.
He wants to be the best at stuff.
Yes.
Oh, we were talking Enneagram before. He's a 3.
He's a 3.
He wants to be the best and conquer. And so one by one, it's like each character starts to have their own kind
crisis,
of existential. What is life? What does it mean? Could it be different? Dawn, for her, she's this spokesperson who, for the most part, any of these commercials that she's filming, she's in a bathing suit for.
Even when she's at home, she's in a bikini. I don't know if you know.
Oh, I don't think
she's always wearing a bikini.
Yeah. So somehow that gets pointed out to her, and she kind of realizes, is all that I am how I look? So she starts to wear, I don't know, like coveralls
or that's the funniest
and like
part of the movie.
it's like a Handmaid's Tale kind of
She
like
has a bonnet.
Yeah. And then the company tries to film commercials with her wearing that, and it's not working. So they hire Isla Fisher to be the person on screen with Naomi Watts' voice.
Right. So the message to her is, we don't want to see you. We want you to be invisible because you're not beautiful. Yeah.
But really, I think for her, her crisis is she felt like when she was physically seen, she wasn't being seen as a person.
Right.
So it's this weird.
And now that she's trying to speak, and of course this is corporate, so they have their own, when she's trying to speak, then she's trying to be shut up. And I think that's what's interesting is that the people who are having the crisis are constantly being told they're crazy. You're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy, because they're disrupting, because they're not following the script.
Sure.
Literally and just in general.
Yeah, and we've talked about like homeostasis and systems on the show before, and really that in each of the lives of each of the characters, they're in a system. They're multiple systems, but in whatever kind of primary system they're in, their crisis interrupts the system because it interrupts them. And so the system tries to correct itself. It tries to right itself. You're crazy. Stop this. Get back to doing what you were doing.
Right.
Like don't rock the boat.
Yeah. And she even asks her boyfriend, Brad, he says, well, go home and change. Go home and change. And she says, but do I have a choice? Do I have a choice to be pretty or not? And he just looks at her and she says, no, I don't have a choice. So the idea is, this is who you are. You're nothing else. This is your worth. And, we're taught that we don't have a choice to be anything else.
Yeah. Which I feel like that's a pretty natural developmental stage for all of us. Like I think that every one of us encounters a crisis that is similar to that. Just developmentally, as a person is, I'm thinking like leaving home, whether that's college or post-college, but that stage of kind of I'm choosing which direction I want to go with my life. They encounter how much of who I am, is me versus how much of who I am was poured into me by my parents or my community or, my friend group. What is me? Am I happy and satisfied with me? Or is there a different direction I want to go in pursuit of me? Ugh, my head hurts.
Well, and I mean, if we don't have that crisis, I mean, that's just it. Like, I think that crisis can be healthy. I think crisis can be helpful. They can be important. And what lots of us try to do is tamp it down. And it's going to come out. It's going to come out in unhealthy ways if we don't explore it. And I think it's also because people around us are telling us not to explore it. People are telling us that there's something wrong with us when we have a crisis and we start to question things.
Because it points things out. It makes things stick out to them.
Like, it made me, Tommy Corn, when his wife is leaving and saying, you're crazy, he tells his little daughter, he says, honey, these shoes that your mom is wearing, some little kids made it in a factory, in another part of the world, and they're going blind. And the little girl starts crying, and the mom says, "You're crazy, you're crazy." And I mean, really, is he crazy? Pointing something out that we don't want to look at in society. And, I think about that little girl. She's, this was 2004, so she's grown up. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting that the new generation, that's exactly what they're saying. Like, they're very careful consumers. They're kind of bringing a spotlight to this stuff. So what was once considered crazy is now something that we're realizing, like, yeah, we're contributing to this. And so we all kind of agree we decide what we want to look at. Mm-hmm. And if somebody decides to look at something else or shine a spotlight on something that we don't want to look at, then suddenly we're going to kind of throw them away and dismiss them as crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The things that Tommy seems to be pointing out, all of them are true.
Right.
All of them on some level everyone's aware of. Mm-hmm. But I think, what you're saying, our attention as an individual is like a spotlight. When we shine it on something, we become aware of it, and then the things on the periphery tend to fade to black. Yeah. And so it's easy for us to make our world, quote unquote, about something and discard the other.
Right.
The other
and
stuff.
I mean, actively reject it.
Yeah.
Right. And so I feel like Tommy represents just kind of like our pure raw emotions, like anger, that we try to discard because he's angry most of the time.
Yeah.
He's punching people. He's aggressive. He's chaotic. He's like this human chaos. Mm-hmm. And we tend to just kind of suppress it because we think that it's not useful.
Or if he's not, then Katerine is. Because as soon as, at some point, Vivian and Bernard have Albert and Tommy in front of them, and they say, okay, you're going to be his other. Mm-hmm. You guys are going to kind of support each other and be companions on this journey of existential exploration that you're on. And it's almost about that time where Katerine switches from Tommy to Albert.
Yeah.
And then he kind of starts to interact with nihilism a little bit.
Yeah.
And you see this kind of montage of him with her, like, rubbing dirt all over his face and then, like, having sex with her on a log. Yeah. And it's just this, like, I don't know, like, total following your impulse.
Yeah, it's like raw animalism. Yeah. You're just following your instincts and you're just being an animal, like very hindbrain.
Which I think like if you follow nihilism all the way down, that's where you end up. Like if nothing has any meaning, then you can ultimately just do whatever you want.
Do whatever you want, follow any impulse. Matter. Yeah. But she also used it, just like the other method that they were using in the body bag, they were kind of punching themselves with a bag.
It was like a kid's toy, and it's like a rubber ball with a handle that you sit on and you kind of bounce. Yeah.
And they were hitting themselves, and the idea was to hit yourself until the point where you're not feeling anything, where you lose yourself and you lose your suffering, you lose who you are, and you're just kind of part of everything. Which I think is what people do when they...
Oh my gosh, is what I thought the end of therapy was going to be nihilism?
Well...
That you would be unaffected?
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeesh.
But I think that's
scary.
I think we're all looking for that, right? Because I think that emotions can be intense. I think that they can be overwhelming. So I think that we all sometimes look for an escape, a diversion, a relief from it. I think lots of times when somebody's suicidal, that's what they're looking for. Mm-hmm. They just kind of want to be in this vast nothingness. Yeah. They don't really want to die. They just want to escape this suffering. And so I think they kind of hit themselves enough where for a moment they experience this. Mm-hmm. And she tells them, you can't stay like that forever. Mm-hmm. They say, yes, we can. No, you can't, because you're going to get sucked back into human drama. And it's inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the truth. It's this dance where we center and we stabilize, and then we get sucked right back in, because we're human. And also, human drama is where we're learning, right?
Yeah.
That's that stage where we're learning. That's where all the good stuff is.
Well, I mean, most of my work is with addicts, and so there's a lot of, I guess you could say, they're platitudes or sayings or something involved in like 12 steps in recovery. And one of them is to learn to live life on life's terms.
Yeah.
Because, in active addiction, the world is revolving around you as the addict, and, it's I will get my drug, whatever the drug is, whether it's a substance or a process, but I will get that at any cost. That is my driving motivation. So instead of that, it becomes, well, it's life on life's terms. And so you have to learn how to engage with life.
Yeah.
You have to learn how to self-regulate. You have to learn how to have healthy intimacy with others, even when they're different, even when what they want comes in conflict with what you want. You have to learn how to relate. And that reminds me of that. It's them smacking themselves in the head.
It is. Yeah. It's definitely like an addiction, like that numbing.
Yeah.
Right. But you can't stay there.
You can't stay there.
You can't stay there. You're going to get pulled back in.
And I think what's interesting is, just like with addiction, that worked for a little bit, but ultimately it becomes something harmful, and ultimately it ends up, so most of my work is with men with sex addictions. And so we talk about what, in the pursuit of, or in the desire for healthy intimacy and relationship, you end up settling for false intimacy. And it's you get this kind of counterfeit facsimile or representation of what the real thing is, and then you end up convincing yourself that is enough.
And you have more control over it too.
Yes,
right?
it's on demand.
Because real intimacy, it's, you have to give up a lot of control.
Yeah. I tell my clients, like, in real intimacy and real relationships, it costs you something. Yeah. You have to pay into that, and the payment is vulnerability. You have to be vulnerable with someone, which is inherently risky.
Yeah.
Versus with false intimacy, it's on demand. You can get it anytime you want. It doesn't cost anything. It may cost monetarily, but it doesn't cost you anything relationally.
That's real value. Yeah.
And so inherently there's this power and control dynamic with that too, because you get to say, I'm going to engage in it now instead of now. Yeah. And I'm going to, go with this instead of that. And so you get to have what you want when you want it, and that's just not how life works.
Right.
And so kind of, in working on engaging with your intrapersonal self, that's, I think, where, at least for me, it's where intimacy started, was reconnecting with my heart first, and then learning how to connect in healthy intimacy with others.
Yeah.
And there is some gray inside of me, but there's a lot of gray outside of me. And so if I can kind of get settled with the little bit of gray inside of me first, it helps me settle with the gray outside of me. And I think that feeds back in. The more that I can settle with the outside, the more it helps with the inside. And it's like what you're saying, that's where you learn. It's in the chaos of relationship.
It's hard, yeah.
It is hard, but it's so worth it.
It is.
My client that I was telling you about with the depression yesterday, I even said to him, the question we ended up at was, what do you want for your life? Which is a giant question.
It is, yeah.
And then I said, walking forward into recovery, into engaging, into health, it's the toughest thing you'll ever do. But you're not going to do it alone. And it's the most rewarding. So, yes, it's scary, but I'm with you. And I'm not going to leave you. And you're going to end up with something better than what you have now.
It's a good sell.
Yeah, right? It's just...
Do they buy it?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think what is
They're ready
interesting
for
about...
it.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about where we're at now, we're like 2 years in,
Okay.
is that I think he is ready now.
Yeah. It
And
takes
you can
time.
see it.
It
Yes.
takes time.
Yeah.
It's, patience. Patience is a virtue. And I think that sometimes people don't understand that about therapy. And even therapists themselves, like, we get impatient because we want what's best for our clients and we want to see it tomorrow. We don't want to see them sit and struggle, even though we know they need to.
And I think sometimes we think because we're ready to walk forward, that means that they're ready.
Yeah.
And then when they start to fight us, they're not fighting us. They're just not ready.
They're scared.
Yeah. And so I think, it's interesting to see somebody wrestling with some discontent, which I think is the beginning, like, stages of, like, I'm ready to rock this boat.
Yeah.
It's an exciting place to be.
When you have to work up those reserves too.
Oh yeah.
And teach them to trust themselves.
Which is, I think, that's an interesting thing that I think I fought as a client. And so I always keep that in the back of my mind as a clinician. You as a client, sometimes you want that answer or you want that kind of thing. And so when the therapist then pushes you to trust your gut instead of validating or something like that, it feels foreign if you haven't done it before.
Yeah. Well, and I think even for us.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard for us to trust our gut because we have our mind chattering away as well. So,
We've got negative messages that play.
Oh yeah. There's self-doubt. There's, how effective am I being? Should I have gone this route instead of that route? Am I pushing something on them that they don't want? Are they telling me the truth? There are a lot of things that are going through your mind that you're not sharing with them.
Yeah. And so
mostly about yourself.
Right. And that's kind of goes back to what we were saying before about us, being in touch with ourselves to do the job. We've got to be in the here and now in the session. And that's literally a part of the training, like a part of supervision, a part of having tapes that you watch of yourself and like all of this stuff, because if we allow ourselves to follow those rabbit trails of things, then all of a sudden we're not with the client.
Right.
We're not focusing on them.
Yeah.
And we're not being helpful.
Right.
Which is tough.
Yeah.
It's tough and I think that's really what, no matter how much therapy that you have before you get to grad school, once you start learning the technique and once you start helping others, it's almost like you have to, I just picture when you're kneading bread, you just have to keep folding your own stuff back in and engaging it and engaging it and engaging it until you're, I don't know, almost like so familiar with it that you can know, like, oh yeah, this triggers me. Like I'm ready for that trigger because there's it's like you're not unfamiliar with your own triggers anymore. So you just kind of know.
Yeah. Well, and I've learned two things. One of them is like just being like self-compassionate. I think at the beginning when you start doing therapy, you're kind of like, oh, there I went again. Or, and after a while you go, yeah, well, it's okay. This is me. It's all right that when my client does this, it makes me angry. It's fine. I'm a human being.
Yeah.
So that non-judgment piece for myself helps me just kind of let it go. And then the other thing I've learned is, through supervision and all of that, you think that there's a certain way that you have to be. And after a while, you just kind of have to let that go and be your own kind of therapist. Yeah. So like my self-disclosure is greater than I think than a lot of therapists are. Not necessarily about my personal life, but I talk a lot about my internal processes with my client. Like, well, this is what I'm thinking, and this is the reason that I'm thinking it. And I was taught to like not share that with them, kind of leave them, in this mysterious, like make them think that you have like
I've
this
wrestled with that
mysterious
too,
thought
yeah.
process. I'm very transparent about it. This is what I'm thinking. This is why I'm thinking it. If I get an image, I share my image with them.
Well, my guide for that is always, is it for the benefit of the client?
Right.
Am I saying this now because I've got some kind of tension that I'm trying to relieve? Or am I saying it because I genuinely believe it'll help? You know, and if I think it'll help them, then I think I'm okay.
Yeah.
If it's because I'm trying to release some tension, then it means I've
Yeah.
got some work I've got to do. And
Right.
that I
Well,
gotta
and
go
you
to a
never know.
supervisor.
You never know how it'll land. But yeah, I mean, the way that I was taught, you had to just kind of sit back, and most of it you just kept to yourself, which I do still. But lots of times I tell them exactly what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking it. And I check in with them and see what they think about that.
Yeah.
So my level of like process disclosure is higher than I think a lot of people are. And I've just learned to just accept it and say, this is me. This is the way I work.
Yeah.
And it's okay. It's okay to just kind of flavor it whichever way that you feel individually is the best way to go about it.
I think a lot of that though is just being okay with being yourself, like your personality wise, which I think, you know, even into grad school, I still had this kind of stereotypical idea in my head of a therapist. And it wasn't until I watched a tape of Virginia Satir working with, you know, a 9-person family in a circle, and she's like having a kid stand up and she's giving a kid a hug, and then she's I was like, oh, she's herself. I don't have to lose me to do this.
Right.
Like I can be me and still be a clinician.
Yeah.
I don't have to play a role, which even like before we were recording, I was talking about, you know, when I used to work in churches, my Myers-Briggs was ENFP. And I would say I'm turning a switch on when I get on campus. I'm becoming this outgoing, talk to everybody. And I just knew, you know, it's like a car. Like I filled up the tank. I spent all the gas on Sunday morning. And then I would go into my apartment after lunch and I would cave up until Tuesday.
Recharge.
I'd recharge it all so I could do it all again. Like, you know, for me, I can lean into who I really am as a therapist, and that's how I'm going to be the most effective.
Yeah.
I mean, to certain degrees,
right?
Like, you
it's
know,
always
with,
a balancing
with wisdom.
act.
Yeah.
It's about being congruent, and congruence takes time and a lot of self-knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think especially being in private practice, one thing that I kind of had to re-encounter and re-wrestle with at the beginning of that was the fear of knowing my real self can help some people and not every people, not every person.
Definitely.
So like leaning more into me means I'm almost like saying and having to be okay with, I can't help every client. But that's okay.
We have limits.
Yeah,
we have limits.
Which that's a natural human thing. Recognize I have limitations. I can do anything, but I can't do everything. And what I love the most about at least our community here in Nashville, and I think what I've loved the most about doing this show is I meet so many cool people that I know if I have somebody that sits across from me and I know that I'm not the right person, I mean, well, with you today, you are one of 44 people I can point them to because you'll be the 44th show. So like I can say like, I might not be your person, but man, I know somebody who might be. And I'd love to hook you up with them.
It's teamwork. It's collaborative, right?
Yeah. And I think that takes a bit of humility. Is there anything else in the movie that sticks out to you?
I mean, just like the power of relationship, of when you're gifting somebody patience, compassion, attempted understanding, you're gifting it to yourself as well.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Have you read any Richard Rohr?
No, I haven't.
He's a Franciscan priest. He pops out a lot in the recovery community, but also in if you're a person who's trying to reconcile like maybe your traditional faith with your current experience, he kind of pops into that a lot too. But he talks about the practice of observing the other as a form of self-compassion. So like, you know, if you're encountering a crisis, I guess imagining that you can kind of zoom out of your own body and look at yourself recognizing, like you said, there's some things that we freely offer others that we withhold from ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, as you observe yourself, kind of thinking, what is it that this person is going through and what do they need? And then can I offer that to them, to myself,
Yeah.
as a form of self-regulation, self-compassion, however you want to phrase that. And it seems like that is something that comes out here as well, is just as you offer to others, you offer to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, we're hardwired for connection. So, I mean, every relationship is a gift, and you can learn from every relationship because we are connected. Even though, like you said, sometimes the dots don't look like they connect, but when you step away, you see how they connect. And just kind of having patience for yourself and for others, and having compassion for yourself and for others just can make a world of difference.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wonder if you could tell me something that your clients have taught you.
Oh, resilience. My goodness, resilience. I work, because I speak Spanish, I work with a lot of clients who are undocumented immigrants. And, before coming here, they've suffered traumas that I think, are unimaginable to most of us that have lived a peaceful life here in the States. And my gosh, just the resilience, the ability to function, to love, to parent, to work, even though there's so much pain in the rearview mirror, in the background, even though they're still carrying so much of it. It's such a burden, right? Because lots of times, oh, I've never told anybody. I've never talked about it. Well, yeah, I can't sleep, but that's just normal. You just get on with it,
Well, and isn't there a cultural component too of like, that's our business, we don't talk about that?
Maybe a little bit, but I think more than anything, it's, well, what good would that do? What good would it do? It's there's a lot of psychoeducation about.
Is that just like
Yeah.
a view of like a worldview of like, you're looking for the practical, what can help?
Yeah, I think
like,
it's just survival mode.
Oh, yeah,
It's about survival mode. It's about, well, what's the point of, falling to the ground and crying and revisiting this stuff? What good is that going to do me? Is that going to feed me? Is that going to help my children? No, get on with it. And so I'm just in awe. I am in awe every day of the resilience of my clients, of their ability to find joy, to still find connection, to still have the courage to parent their children in the best way that they can possibly can, and fight for their families, to have faith, to maintain their faith in other people and in God,
on so many levels.
Yes. That, that they teach me every day. Frankly, I tell myself it's a therapeutic technique, but let's be honest, it's also just for my own benefit. Sometimes I'll ask my clients, so you went through this really tough thing. How did you get through it? What resources did you use? What processes did you go through to help yourself out of this? I say it for them to recognize and understand what they have inside of them.
Yeah.
For healing, but at the same time, I want to learn.
Well, what's interesting, at least in my experience with clients, is I feel like I always have to ask them that 2 or 3 times, because at least the first time I ask them, they go, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's almost like they have to then kind of process back and think through how they did it.
Yeah.
Because it's just, like you said, survival.
Yeah. And they have all they need within themselves. I'm just here witnessing the journey.
Yeah.
But honestly, it's just really beneficial to me personally to see what resilience really looks like in practice, embodied in my clients.
I always say this is the best job in the world, because I get to bear witness to so many inspirational people.
Yes.
Who are with courage addressing such difficult things.
Yeah.
And so it's just like a constant reminder, like, there isn't anything you can't do.
And you want to honor them
Yeah.
as well by making yourself also the best person that you can be.
Yeah.
You want to honor those experiences. You want to honor those connections to those people by constantly working on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So, and developing yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. So let's say that somebody was listening to our conversation today and they feel like they could have a good connection with you and they'd like to see you as a client. How can they reach you?
Sure. So I have my private practice. It's called Psychology Nashville. And you can visit my website at psychologynashville.com. So it's pretty easy to remember. And my phone number is 615-800-5667. You can also email me at McKeon, AMCKEON, at psychologynashville.com.
Very cool. Well, Adrianne, thank you so much for being on the show today. It has been such an incredible pleasure to meet you.
Same here.
And I can't think of anybody that could have explained I Heart Huckabees better.
I don't know if I did a very good job. But.
I think you did the best. I mean, like, so one of the things I thought when I started the show, I would get this nerdy on the show, and I've shied away from it, is like, I'll look up, what was the budget of the movie? Mm-hmm. How much did it make back? Just to try to see if people, when it came out, engaged in it the same way that we can engage in it today. Yeah. And so like in 2004, I think the budget was like $20 million, and it made back, not domestically, but internationally, something like 20 million and like 900,000. Like it barely. So
it broke even.
It broke even, not counting marketing and stuff. So it actually
true.
Lost.
Yeah.
And I think that's because, like, if you and I walked out of this movie and we were going to try to explain it to somebody else, they should go see it.
Good luck.
I don't even know where you'd start.
Yeah.
Like, I would maybe just say, like, hey, are you into existential philosophy? Mm-hmm. Which maybe that's a tough sell.
It's a very niche group.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Hi, my love.
Hello.
How's it going?
It's good.
Yeah? Mm-hmm. Nice. Welcome home.
Thank you.
After your 12-hour workday.
Yep. Mm-hmm. It was exactly 12 hours, actually.
Yeah. Actually over. I mean, because you left at 6:30.
Oh, yes. But I was at work for 12 hours.
I would count the commute as part of the job.
Yeah, okay.
Because you wouldn't be making it if it weren't for the job.
True.
So, welcome home.
Long day. Thank you.
It's true. Tell me your thoughts on this week's episode.
It was great. I definitely think this was an interesting, this was, I think, one of the more interesting dynamics in terms of the movie than to the episode. Because I loved the episode. I did not get through the whole movie. Mostly because, I will say, it's not that I didn't like it so much that I didn't finish it. It's just that, like, it was another one of those times where we started it and it was too late and whatever. So, like, I would have finished it. It wasn't that, like, I so didn't like it that I wouldn't have ever watched it. But anyways, all that to say, I thought it was really cool then. This was really the first movie where I feel like it has been a little iffy on, like, do I understand this movie? Do I like it? Is this one that I want to watch? And then to hear Adrian's perspective on it, like, really did change the game for me. Like, I really, I don't know if I would go, like, buy this movie or watch it again, but hearing her thoughts about it made me understand why she really likes it and why, like, what it meant. I feel like she put meaning to it in a way that I couldn't, watching it, which was really cool.
Yeah, I struggled with this one. Which I feel like a lot of times when I try to engage with philosophy, I struggle with it because I think I'm very pragmatic. Like, I really want to see how ideas touch the road, which I think is philosophy.
Yeah.
So I think this episode and this interview was very helpful to me because it helped me see how that can happen. because I think there is or was or can be this thing in me that's like a switch that's like philosophy bad.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't want to engage in it. But to, you know, examine something like this, and this is really why I love doing the show, you know, through the lens of someone who loves it. It makes it a lot easier to grasp.
Yeah. Well, and I really liked how you described it as if all of the questions in your head got turned into people and like played out. I really love that description of it, because to me that makes it less about philosophy, even though I do think that was a big, like you guys even talked about it in the episode, like existential and nihilism and all that was a big part of it. But I think thinking of her lens, like as a psychologist, I think your description fits really well with that. Like it's all the things that are in your head, but then thrown out into the world. Yeah.
And how they interact with one another and you know, played out to the extreme, what it would look like. Yeah.
Yeah. And she said something too that I really loved. And I forget, it was, I mean, you guys were talking about the movie, so it was not in the beginning, but somewhere, I think close to the beginning of when you were talking about the movie, she talked about, you were talking about, Albert going to the existential detectives is what they're called. And why, and you were saying like, you know, yeah, so he saw this African guy 3 times and that's like what made him go to these people to say why. And she said, yeah, when something happens that's significant to us, we want to know if there's meaning in it. And I was like, oh, yes, like you're so right. I think that was such a, almost like goofy to watch on the movie that, you know, he just saw this guy 3 times and now he's going to go seek out these existential people to tell him this mystery. You know, it's like it's almost funny watching it. But then when she said that, I was like, there's totally things that I do that with. Like it's a random coincidence or something happens and for whatever reason it's significant to me. And so I do find meaning in it. Like I'll say, this is what that meant, or this is what I think that meant, or, you know, whatever. So I thought that was really interesting. Like she kind of put words to that in a way that I had not really seen it before. And that I think is true.
What I think it's not just that he saw the guy 3 times. I mean, you and I used to work at Starbucks. We had a few regulars that we would see 3 times a day. So it wasn't like he saw.
Yes.
He had a routine and he went by the same place 3 times in one day. He saw this guy in 3 different sets of clothes in 3 different locations.
By coincidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
And he was like, whoa, that sticks out. Partially because this is a 7-foot tall African man, like literally from Africa. Although I don't remember what country, but
yeah. Also, how did he know that?
He had an accent. I mean, maybe he assumed, or maybe he asked him. I don't remember.
Yeah. When he goes in the body bag, and you guys were talking about him going in the body bag, and I think you were saying like that was such a like why that. And she said...
That was me speaking as somebody who has claustrophobia.
Yes. She said she described it as something that lets you let all the things in your life that aren't you fall away. And that was, again, it was helpful, not just to frame what they were doing, but also kind of made me reflect back to myself. Like there are so many things in our lives, our relationships, our work, like what we do in our free time, the things that we see, the food that we eat, like there's so much in our life that doesn't equal us. And I think that is a really interesting thought. And I think it's worth thinking about, although it might be a scary thought at first. You know, I love chips and salsa, but like chips and salsa is not my identity. You know what I mean? Like what is my identity that it's not my whole identity. Sorry. Let me correct myself. It's only part of my identity. No, I think that's, that might be just a useful thing to reflect on for people, because if you are attached less to the things in your life that are not your identity, like if And actually, Dak Shepard talks about this in his podcast, like your self-esteem. Where do you get your self-esteem from? If you get your self-esteem from like doing things for other people, or, you know, doing something that maybe isn't instant gratification or like immediately fulfilling, but that's rewarding ultimately, like finding your identity in those things might just be a little bit healthier than finding your identity in like the food that you love or the job that you have, or, you know, whatever, the relationships that you have.
It reminded me of the book Essentialism.
Oh yeah.
And I can't advocate for everyone to read this book enough. Like I think I mentioned to you earlier this year, you know, that Russell Brand's Recovery, I think are going to be 2 books that I'm going to try to read every year.
Oh wow.
You know, this, you know, just kind of realizing what in our lives is essential, what in our lives is optional. And I think that sometimes the things that are optional are the things that we cling to the most tightly.
Yeah.
And I think if something is optional, you know, having a really sober conversation with ourselves about, is that something that I want to continue to cling tightly to engage with, to keep as a part of my life?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not optional, doesn't equal bad.
No.
Just, which maybe this is me being the pragmatist again, but like, is it serving you in some way?
Yeah. Or others in a way that fulfills you and
Yeah.
has meaning to you. And and then I think the last thing was, and again, I don't know where this was. I think it was towards the middle. We were sort of talking about the movie as a whole and what you both took away from it. And she said that she thinks the movie shows the power of relationships. And when she said that, I was like, huh? Because I didn't watch the whole thing. So that's, you know, everybody take this with a grain of salt. But I also I think you like told me what happened in it. And I obviously had listened to the plot. Yeah. But she talked about the characters in the movie having room and giving room to each other to ask like big philosophical or psychological like life questions, and them having room to ask it for some reason like struck me, that I think that is such a good point. Like the power of having a safe space to ask questions of your life and yourself and your meaning, and like to reflect with someone. That's hopefully what therapy is. Like therapy is a space to come in and like reflect about your life, and whether that's current or past experiences or worries about future experiences, to have somebody kind of hold up a mirror or zip you up in a body bag, metaphorically speaking, to let you explore those things. Like that is what the therapeutic relationship should be. And I hope, whether it's in a therapy space or not, I would want everybody to have at least one relationship where they have the space to think more broadly, like about their life, which I also recognize, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, that is not necessarily the first stop for people, like in figuring out life and whatever. But I think if there's a chance, that it's a privilege and cool to be able to do that.
Yeah. I think it's exactly what therapy is and needs to be. I was watching, I subscribe to a channel on YouTube called The Financial Diet. And it's all like money tips and stuff. But today's episode, they had Katie Morton, who also has a YouTube channel. She's a LMFT out in California. Her channel is all about mental health and relationships. And they had her on the Financial Diet thing, and they were just kind of doing a Q&A. And somebody wrote in and asked a question about, like, you know, I am afraid that my friends think I'm a bad friend because of how much I'm talking to them about my problems right now. And so she kind of advocated for, you know, that's a good reason to go to a therapist, is because you don't have to ask us how we're doing. Like you don't have to come in and receive, or I guess give to us. Like we are here for you. And so, you know, hopefully any therapy office would be a place where it's safe for you to ask big questions. It's safe for you to reflect, and it's safe to do it with somebody spotting you. So in the same way, if you're trying to set a new PR at the gym, I'm using gym terms. Are you impressed? Yeah. If you're trying to set if you're trying to set a new PR at the gym, you got a spotter there on the bench, like behind the bench with you. Like a therapy office could be a good place to really wrestle with some of this stuff, because you got a spotter, you got somebody there to help you reflect, to ask questions that maybe you're not thinking of, and to affirm you in conclusions that you're coming to, or to ask more filtering questions along the way. So we've got a couple announcements. The first being something that I got to do today. When I first became a client in therapy, like the very first book that was recommended to me, I've mentioned it a million times on the podcast. A million guests haven't even had a million guests, but that many people have mentioned it. The Voice of the Heart. It's a book by Chip Dodd. When I came to Nashville, I knew he was here because my best friend Todd worked for him at the time, and I just thought, how cool would it be to meet Chip Dodd one day and just tell him thank you for the impact that he has had on my life. And today I got to interview him, and he is our guest on the show next week. I got to go to his office, and we talked about a movie, and I got to shake his hand, and I got to tell him, thank you so much for the work that you've done. And in a very real way, the impact that you have had in the world is now going to be double, because everybody that I get a chance to impact will have your dust on them because of how you've impacted me. And so next week on the show, Dr. Chip Dodd, author of Voice of the Heart, we're going to be talking about the movie We Were Soldiers. I am still just fangirling out and flabbergasted, and I can't believe that I had the chance to meet him and talk with him, and it was just so cool.
That is so exciting.
Yeah. So that's announcement number one.
Yeah.
You got an announcement too.
I do, and it's not that I'm pregnant. Yeah, so Josh and I have been talking for a hot second about just the change in our schedule that's happened since we've moved, and I've also had a job change, and so my time and my capacity looks different. And I think that you mentioned last week when I was not on the episode, that obviously there's times in life where, and like seasons where you say no to one thing so that you can say yes to other things. And last week was just a week where I was trying to say yes to really trying to take care of myself, because we had a busy couple of weeks and I needed the extra margin time for that. And that was sort of eye-opening, and it made me sort of examine my extra time and how little of it that I have right now. And I hope, that that's not a permanent thing, but this, for the time being, I'm going to not be on every episode anymore. At the end, I will occasionally come in for movies that I love, or, guests that I want to listen to, or just when I have extra time, because I do really like doing this. It's really fun. But I've just got less margin, and I need to be using my margins intentionally to care for myself so that I can show up more for my people and show up more in my life, and, all good things. So
yeah,
that's it.
And you came to me, you said something the other day to me about like, you said that was something you were thinking of, and asked what I thought about it. And I said, I am the biggest advocate in the world. And I've said for, 3-4 years now, I'm the president of the Leigh-Ann Wraps fan club. And so, I'm always going to be a fan of you doing what you need to do to take care of yourself. And so, you're saying no to the podcast full-time, not full-time, regularly right now, so you can say yes to yourself, and so you can say yes to other stuff. And I think that's a great model of self-care. It's a great model of realizing what your limitations are, and having the humility to acknowledge them and to do what you need to do.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, while that is extremely sad for the show, it's happy for you. And, you know, like you said, you'll pop back in.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe at some time in the future, you know, when you got a little more margin, you
Yeah.
might join regularly again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's it for this week.
Bye, guys. I love you. Thanks for listening to me. Those of you who do.
If you guys have had, if you've been impacted by the thoughts that Leigh-Ann has given at the end of every episode, and you want to maybe just say thanks or write her a little note, email it in, therapisttheater@gmail.com, and she'll be able to see it. With that, we're going to say that we can raise the lights, lower the curtain, and for this week, do you want to say it?
The theater's closed.